He walked into my cubicle like he owned it, like he already had my job, my desk, my entire career. And he was just waiting for me to figure it out. He didn't know I already had. Dylan was fresh out of college. That was obvious from the grin. The kind of grin you only get before the world has had a real chance at you. He dropped into the guest chair across from me, completely uninvited, and said, "So, you're the one I'm shadowing, huh?" Shadowing. That word landed like a punch wrapped in a handshake, because earlier that morning, Greg had cornered me in the break room. Greg, my manager. The man who smelled like Axe, body spray, and bad intentions. Every single day, without fail, he smiled at me like a man who'd just discovered fire and wanted credit for the sun. "We just need a little redundancy, Ava, in case you ever take a vacation." Redundancy. He said it the way people say downsizing when they mean you're gone. I hadn't taken a vacation in for years. Not one sick day. I once worked through a double ear infection and a sprained wrist because payroll doesn't pause. Because you fell down your porch stairs chasing a squirrel out of your tomato plants. True story. Don't ask. So I knew the vacation line was garbage. Dylan wasn't here to learn from me. He was here to erase me. Act 2. The observation. And the thing about Dylan, he wouldn't stop narrating. Every time I pulled up a system, every time I ran a report, he'd lean in with this wide-eyed look, like he was filming a tutorial. "Oh wow. You built this whole reconciliation process yourself?" I just nodded. He didn't need to know I'd spent months automating our entire expense routing system. Because Greg had once lost his mind over a $12 mileage reimbursement showing up 3 days late. Dylan typed like a caffeinated squirrel. His questions sounded like they were generated by AI after 2 drinks. And every few minutes, Greg would materialize right behind us, like a haunted Roomba. "Hey Ava, what kind of access are you giving Dylan for vendor management?" "Read only," I said. Didn't even look up. He didn't like that. I could feel his disapproval before I saw it. Like cheap cologne mixed with barely concealed panic. Might as well give him full. He's going to need it eventually. I smiled. Didn't move a finger. But I was watching. I was always watching. I noticed how Dylan already knew where the vendor authorization templates were before I pointed to them. I noticed how Greg kept checking the timestamps of our sessions on Slack, and I noticed the moment Dylan asked whether we kept legacy payroll backups from 2020, and winked. Like we shared a secret. We didn't. But we were about to Act 3. The lunch. Greg picked a sushi restaurant. One of those minimalist places with bonsai trees by the windows and menu items with no prices. Just pretentious enough for him to feel cultured. Just expensive enough to impress someone he'd never actually understand. He kept calling it authentic. Like he hadn't just Googled Japanese restaurant impressive enough for a CEO 20 minutes before making the reservation. I arrived early. Old habit. I like to know the exits before the trap closes. Mr. Takahashi walked in 5 minutes later. Sharp suit. Still eyes. The kind of calm that only comes from a man who has already read every person in the room and filed his conclusions away. His assistant, his longtime translator, was delayed. Flight issue. Wouldn't make it in time. Greg saw it as an opening. "Guess I'll have to put that Duolingo streak to work," he said, already laughing at his own joke before it landed. Already 2 sake bombs in. Already sweating through his collar. He ordered for everyone. Mispronounced 3 things. Chuckled about streamlining our legacy systems. Handed over a printed slide deck. Graphs I had built. Charts I had designed. Analysis I had spent weeks running. His name was at the top. And then somewhere between his 4th mispronunciation and a half-baked boast about digital transformation, Greg leaned toward Mr. Takahashi, dropped his voice like it was a secret, and said, "She's a bit old-fashioned. She'll be gone by next quarter." He looked straight at me when he said it, eyes glazed with arrogance. Convinced those words had floated right over my head like smoke, every syllable, crisp, clear, perfectly understood. What Greg didn't know, because he never asked, because men like him never do, is that I spent 5 years in Tokyo, 5 years living off vending machine onigiri and 280 yuan's ramen, finishing my master's in financial systems, studying Japanese until my dreams came with subtitles, filing pension documents and digital payroll audits in kanji so complex it would make most people cry into their QuickBooks. So when Greg called me old-fashioned, I reached for my tea with the absolute calm of a woman who has already chosen the song for your funeral. Something shifted in me right then. Not rage, not yet. Something quieter than that. Something colder. Clarity. The kind that settles into your spine like steel cooling in the dark. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to defend myself. I was going to end him. Quietly. Precisely. In a language he would never understand. When lunch wrapped, Greg patted me on the back like he was blessing the help. Great job not zoning out during the Japanese. Oh, I found it very educational, I said. I bowed slightly. He missed the edge in my voice. Men like him always do. As I stepped out into the drizzle, umbrella in hand, I whispered something. Just for me. Just under my breath. In Japanese. My turn, because that was the moment I stopped being his employee and started becoming his reckoning. Act 4. The evidence at that weekend. I opened a bottle of Pinot Noir, pulled up our internal payroll logs on my personal monitor, and started combing through metadata, the way a forensic accountant does when she has a vendetta and nothing to lose. I wasn't looking for closure. I was looking for leverage, and I found it fast. The first flag. Greg had manually adjusted his own year-end bonus for days after the approval window had closed. Buried deep inside the noise of Q4 cost center transitions, he'd used an override code reserved for emergency corrections. Think maternity leave adjustments. Retro pay. The kind of code nobody questions when they trust the person holding the keys. Unfortunately for Greg, I am the person who built those keys. Over the following week, I bled red ink into a private spreadsheet. I named without a hint of irony Gregory's greatest hits. Vendor number 8483. Benton Consulting. $7,250 paid in Q3. No invoice. No point of contact. No contract anywhere in our system. Vendor number 9211. Mosaic Advisory. Listed address. A WeWork that shut down in 2021. Project Zenith Sync marked closed last year, suddenly carrying $18,000 in consulting fees. Backdated quietly into February. Greg wasn't skimming. He was siphoning. Methodically. Confidently. Like a man who believed he was the only person smart enough to notice. But I didn't go nuclear. Not yet. I kept training Dylan. Kept walking him through the systems. Kept smiling through his questions. Wow, Ava, you coded this whole reconciliation template yourself? I'd say, just like that, quiet, patient, unbothered. Because the most dangerous thing in any room isn't the person who's angry, it's the one who's already done. I switched to decaf, not because I was tired, because I needed to stay completely, surgically calm when Dylan asked if we could simplify the controls around approvals. I blinked exactly twice before answering, sure, and then I quietly modified his access so that every single change he made would auto-forward to an admin inbox, one that only I controlled. He felt empowered. Greg felt confident, and I felt nothing except the quiet hum of a system doing exactly what I told it to. I gave Dylan admin-level permissions, sandboxed, monitored, time-stomped down to the millisecond. I wanted Greg to believe his little prodigy was ready, that the replacement was almost in position, that I was almost out the door. I even started mislabeling columns in my walkthroughs. Small errors. Nothing obvious. Just enough to see who was paying attention. Dylan wasn't. Greg was. I caught him skimming my Slack messages after hours, reading threads he had no business touching. What he didn't know, our internal system flags every message read by someone it wasn't addressed to. I screenshotted that too, and the whole time, I moved like fog. Quiet, slow, no ripples. Every receipt, every falsified timestamp, every bonus bump that shouldn't exist. I logged it, labeled it, translated it, and gave it context so precise that a compliance officer on the other side of the planet could follow it without asking a single clarifying question. Greg's unauthorized salary adjustments. Dylan's suspiciously accelerated approval ratings. Emails Greg had blind copied to Tokyo taking credit for process. Improvements I had spent 3 fiscal quarters building from scratch. 3 fiscal quarters. There's a particular kind of clarity that arrives when you stop trying to save your job and start protecting something that can't be taken from you, your pride. And when pride gets weaponized correctly, quietly, without theatrics, it becomes the most elegant form of destruction there is. Greg once told me the thing he liked about me was that I didn't make waves. He was right. I wasn't a wave, I was the tide. And he never once looked up to notice it. Rising, Act 6 Mayut hit me mid-scroll. Somewhere between a forged vendor contract and a bonus. Request stamped urgent in Comic Sans, like a war crime. Committed against the entire concept of professionalism. Mayu. Tanaka, Mr. Takahashi's longtime assistant. The woman who had translated board meetings in real time, caught errors in financial reports before the ink had dried, and could shut down an entire room of executives with a single raised eyebrow. She'd stepped back from the public-facing side of the company when Takahashi scaled down travel during the pandemic. But the rumor, and in corporate circles, rumors are almost always directions, was that she was still deeply embedded in the Tokyo office. Quiet, surgical, fiercely loyal to the man at the top, which made her exactly the kind of person I needed. I dug through an old Outlook archive until I found her last known address. Composed a message, simple, respectful, no subject line that would flag a filter. In Japanese, it's been a while. This is Ava. I have something brief I'd like to ask you. She replied 3 hours later. No emojis, no preamble, just a single line, clean and precise as a blade, of course. I'm listening. We met over encrypted video 2 nights later. I was in my apartment in a hoodie and slippers. She was in what looked like a glass conference room in Tokyo, the neon skyline bleeding behind her like a painting you couldn't afford. I didn't lead with everything. That's not how you speak to someone like Mayu. You don't dump. You don't perform. You let the facts breathe, and you let her decide what they mean. I've noticed a pattern in vendor expenses that doesn't align with project timelines, I said. And someone appears to be adjusting bonuses outside of compliance windows. She didn't flinch, just nodded once barely and asked, are these adjustments recurring? Yes. The person responsible is Gregory R., VP of Operations. She exhaled softly. Not surprised. Not yet moved. Just processing. The way someone does when a suspicion they've held quietly for months finally gets a name. I shared one document. Just one. A redacted vendor payout spreadsheet. Dates, amounts, anomalies. No accusations. No dramatic language. Just breadcrumbs laid down with the precision of someone who knows exactly where the trail ends. She tilted her head slightly. Do you have more? I do. And from that moment on, I had a tether. A real one. Not through Slack, not through Greg, through Mayu, which meant everything I handed over carried weight I couldn't manufacture on my own. Over the next 10 days, I fed her data like clockwork. Edited spreadsheets cross-referenced against originals. Comparison logs. A zipped folder of timestamps Greg thought he'd deleted. He hadn't. I translated every file header into proper Japanese. Added footnotes for corporate context. Cross-referenced our internal approval codes with their Tokyo equivalents. Didn't editorialize. Didn't beg. Didn't editorialize once. I simply presented the truth. Cold, sharp, irrefutable, like a scalpel laid quietly on a table. Mayu never praised me. Never let warmth into the exchange. But I could read the signs. The way her responses got shorter, more surgical. The way she started requesting raw metadata exports instead of summaries. That's how you know someone is building a case. When they stop wanting your interpretation and start asking for source files. On the surface, nothing had changed. Greg still wandered the office like he was hosting a TED Talk nobody signed up for. Dylan still ate his yogurt aggressively beside me, pretending to understand pivot tables, but something had changed in me. For the first time in weeks, I felt my spine straighten, my breath deepen. I had a line to Tokyo now, a real one, and every keystroke I logged had gravity. I wasn't clawing for survival anymore. I was planting seeds in concrete. And I was the only one who knew spring was coming. Act 7, the theft. It happened on a Tuesday. Because all corporate betrayals happen on Tuesdays, when the week is just comfortable enough for someone to think they've gotten away with something. A calendar invite appeared in my inbox. One I hadn't requested. One I hadn't been consulted on. Subject: Kickoff Zenith Sync Transition. Owner: Dylan K. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Not processing. I understood immediately. I just needed a second to let the audacity of it fully land. Zenith Sync was mine. I had built it during lockdown. 18-hour days in yoga pants and unbrushed hair. Greg pinging me at midnight with quick questions that were never quick. I had cleaned up 3 years of bloated, half-finished code, integrated it into payroll, and rebuilt our entire reconciliation pipeline into something that could survive a nuclear audit. It was my Sistine Chapel. Except instead of a ceiling, it was a spreadsheet. And instead of God reaching for Adam, It was me reaching across 40 tabs to stop a $200,000 error from going unnoticed. And now Dylan, who still couldn't explain the difference between gross and net without a pause, was listed as its new owner. No warning, no handoff meeting, no conversation, a digital eviction notice. Delivered while I was sitting 3 feet away. Greg drifted past my desk an hour later, coffee in hand, wearing that two-sip, smug smile, the one that made me want to throw something heavy at the wall behind him. Hey Ava, hope you don't mind. Figured you could use some bandwidth relief. Dylan's been asking for more responsibility. I smiled so wide my molars nearly cracked. Of course. Happy to support from the sidelines. He nodded like I'd just handed over my legacy with both hands and a bow. Like I was graciously stepping aside. Like I was done. Let him think that. 2 hours later, the real masterpiece arrived. An email CC'd to the Tokyo board. Subject line, Payroll Optimization Initiative. Initial successes. 3 paragraphs of Greg congratulating himself. Phrases like under my guidance and significant efficiency gains attached to work I had done alone, in silence, across 3 fiscal years, and at the bottom, an attachment. A compliance document, supposedly confirming the new process met both us and Japan's side standards. Looked official. Dates aligned. Language was tight, but something twitched in my gut. The way it does when you're watching a magician and you realize mid-trick that the whole deck is rigged. I checked the metadata. The compliance officer's signature block had been copied from a form I filed 6 months ago. The approval code reused. The timestamp backdated using a patch script I personally buried in the sandbox environment for version testing. Greg didn't just forge a document, he forged mine. He had used my own tools, my own code, my own architecture, to erase me with something I built, and he assumed because he had always assumed that I wouldn't notice, that I'd already rolled over, that I was somewhere drafting my exit interview, talking points, and quietly accepting my own disappearance. I opened a message to Mayu, kept it short. Please review the attached. The format appears correct, but the contents and signature block have been altered. No reply for an hour. Then one word, confirmed. She didn't ask follow-up questions, didn't hedge, didn't wait. She forwarded it directly to legal. I wasn't copied. Of course I wasn't, but I knew the signs. The delay, the silence, the sudden stillness that settles over an office right before everything shifts. That's how the machine moves, when it's finally turning its weight towards someone's throat. Dylan drifted past my desk not long after. That awkward, eager gloat he couldn't quite hide. Hey, Ava, if you have any Zenith files, I could really use them. You know, for continuity. Sure, I said. Sweet as something that could kill you slowly. Let me find the sanitized versions. I opened a new folder on my desktop, named it without hesitation, Scorched Earth. Then I started organizing every file, every screenshot, every audit log, every time-stamped anomaly into a final, polished package. Methodical, labeled, irrefutable. Greg had just made his last mistake, and I was no longer collecting evidence. I was preparing the execution. Act 9. The Inviteth calendar invite landed late Friday afternoon, right when the office mentally evaporates. When people are already halfway out the door, already thinking about what they're drinking tonight, already somewhere else entirely. Subject, Q4 efficiency strategy. Attendance mandatory. Inside, vague corporate language. Cost optimization. Organizational alignment. The kind of phrases designed to sound neutral while pointing a gun at specific people. And there, buried 3 lines down quietly, almost apologetically listed, were 3 names under transition consideration candidates. Mine was last, like he thought placing it at the bottom softened the blow. Like alphabetical order was a kindness. I didn't react. I didn't forward it. I didn't call anyone. I took a screenshot, filed it in a folder I'd named in case I'm gaslit, and closed my laptop with the steady hands of someone who already knew exactly how the last act ended, because that morning, 4:42 a.m., Seattle time, right in the middle of Tokyo's lunch rush, an email had been sent from a confidential Tokyo address to every board member on file. No subject line, just attachments. The first, a spreadsheet titled Unauthorized Adjustments, 2022-2023. The second, a PDF labeled Compliance Fabrication Gregory R. the third, a zip folder, full audit trail, internal use only, every file meticulously translated, headers color-coded, timelines mapped. Approval metadata untouched. Nothing dramatic. Nothing editorialized. Just unrelenting accuracy. The kind of evidence that doesn't yell. It just whispers. Look closer. Act 10. The room. Be the time I walked into that Monday morning meeting. The boardroom was packed and uncharacteristically silent. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses against your eardrums and tells you the air has already changed. Greg stood near the head of the table, flipping through his presentation remote like he was auditioning. His tie was slightly crooked. His smile was just a beat too rehearsed. The kind you maintain when the ground is shifting under your feet and you're trying not to look down. I chose the front row, dead center. I sat down, crossed my legs, and folded my hands over a notebook I had no intention of opening. I wanted him to see my face. I wanted to be the last thing he looked at before everything collapsed. Greg clicked through his slides. Cost containment, operational realignment. His voice was steady on the first two. On the third slide, it cracked, just slightly, just enough. Before we dive in, I want to address something that came to our attention this morning. There it is. He tried to frame it as a minor administrative hiccup. Some documentation that appeared to have been manipulated. Something legal was already handling. Nothing to worry about. The CEO, who had been still and silent throughout, raised one hand. No, we're not working with legal, he said, voice low and unhurried. They're working with us. One sentence. Delivered like a scalpel. Greg blinked. Before he could speak, a board member slid a printed copy of the audit trail across the table toward him. Did you authorize these payments? Greg reached for it with the careful hesitancy of a man trying not to leave fingerprints on something he'd already touched 100 times. I watched the room freeze around him. Every breath, every micro shift in every face. The particular corporate silence that only descends when the predator realizes too late that the trap was never where he thought it was. I reached for my thermos and took a slow sip. Mint chamomile. Greg's favorite. He used to tell anyone who'd listen that it helped with performance anxiety. Apparently, he needed more of it. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I just sat there, not smug, not loud, just completely, devastatingly ready, and let the email do what 4 years of patience had built it to do. Greg stalled. His voice climbed higher with each pivot. Broader organizational shifts, future-facing leadership, innovation frameworks, as if enough jargon could cancel out a spreadsheet. But the CEO hadn't moved. He was staring at a single line in the document. One transfer. One name. Mr. R. Can you explain this transaction? Greg's mouth opened, closed, opened again. That payment was part of an end-of-quarter adjustment, tied to vendor onboarding. The reconciliation team approved it. I have the memo somewhere. His hands shuffled through a folder. Like a man searching for a rabbit. That was never in the hat. I believe Ava might have signed off. I didn't blink, and then, as if the room had been waiting for its cue, the door opened. Act 11. Maish walked in without announcing herself. 5 feet of quiet command in a navy blazer, carrying a folder like it was the only object in the room that mattered. Mai didn't nod at anyone, didn't smile, didn't pause to read the room. She walked straight past the stunned row of executives, straight to the head of the table, and placed a navy folder stamped with the Tokyo office seal directly in front of the CEO. Then she stepped back and waited. Nobody moved. Even Greg sat frozen, one hand still buried in his manila folder, as if staying perfectly still might make her disappear. The CEO opened the folder and read. His expression didn't shift. He simply passed the contents to his left, and then it began that slow, quiet ripple. Each board member reading in silence, glancing at Greg, passing it on, reading, glancing, passing. Mayu stepped forward, opened the folder she still held, and in the clearest, most composed voice I had ever heard in a corporate room, the voice of someone who has spent years saying difficult things without flinching, she read, "This manager, Gregory R., has defrauded this company and insulted your judgment. See attached documentation." She didn't raise her voice, didn't pause for effect, delivered it the way a surgeon makes the final cut, without ceremony, without hesitation, because the work had already been done. Greg looked like someone had cut the cord to his nervous system. His mouth fell open. Nothing came out. His eyes swept the room left, right, desperate, searching for a sympathetic face, a rebuttal, even a hesitant nod. Someone to throw him a line. And a one moved. Somewhere at the back of the room, a chair creaked. Someone coughed. Papers shifted. The sounds of a room very carefully, not looking at a man who is actively dissolving. And me? I didn't say a word. I shifted slightly in my seat, adjusted the sleeve of my blazer, and looked Greg directly in the eye. He knew. He had known for a while, he just hadn't let himself believe it. As Mayu turned toward the door and walked past me, our eyes met for exactly 1 second. And a wink. No smile, just a single, precise nod, the kind exchanged between two women who are fluent in the same language. Strategy, silence, and the patience to let both do the work. Act 12. The last flail. Greg tried one more time. Of course he did. Men like him don't surrender. They thrash. They grab at whatever splinter of authority they think they can still reach. He leaned forward, squared his shoulders, deployed the battle cry of every man who has already lost but refuses to accept it. With all due respect, with all due respect. The phrase that always means the opposite. I believe Ava has been actively working against my leadership for months. Slow rolling handoffs, withholding access. And now she's gone behind our backs to sabotage my relationship with Tokyo. His relationship with Tokyo. Like he was in a long-distance situationship with the board. The room didn't react. No gasps, no shifting chairs. Just the thick, still air of people watching a dying battery try to spark one last time. I stood. No rush, no theatrics. I just rose from my chair slowly enough for every head in the room to follow. Then I bowed, formally, properly, and in Japanese, clear, precise, unhurried. I said, when you joked about firing me, you forgot something. I know your language better than you know your job. The silence that followed was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a room that had just watched someone land the final piece of a puzzle they hadn't known they were watching being assembled. One of the younger board members drew a slow breath. Someone near the back murmured something low and involuntary. Greg just blinked, like a man trying to rewind something that had already aired. The CEO didn't look at Greg. He looked at me and gave a single, measured nod. Finale. The exit security didn't drag Greg out. That would have been too easy. Would have handed him a story, a grievance, a way to make himself the victim on the way down. Instead, two quiet men from internal operations stepped forward, motioned toward the door. No words, no scene, just the calm, final geometry of an institution closing a door on someone. Greg's mouth opened one last time. Nothing came. He picked up his laptop like a child forced to leave a playground, shuffled toward the exit, still half turning, still looking for someone, anyone, to interrupt this. And no one did. The door clicked shut. The CEO turned to the board. Let's move forward. To words. Simple as that. Like Greg, had been a minor clerical error, already corrected. Maya set a brief memo on the table. Internal realignments. Revised reporting structures. And there, at the bottom of page 1, my name, Director of Financial Systems. Reporting to Tokyo HQ. I had signed the contract 2 weeks ago. I gathered my folder, took one last look at the room, at the executives still quietly reassembling what had just happened, at the empty chair Greg had left behind, at the navy folder Mayu had placed on the table like a monument or a tombstone, and then I walked out. No strut, no grin, no dramatic pause at the doorway, just silence. Fluent, unhurried, chosen silence. Somewhere behind me, a chair scraped back into place. The meeting continued, but I was no longer in it. I was beyond it, and the only sound that followed me out was the one Greg never heard coming, the tide.